The carriage swayed, a gilded cage on wheels, its velvet interior smelling faintly of the lavender water Elara wore. She was the daughter of a Boston merchant, a man whose wealth was a fortress, and she was being shipped west like precious cargo. Her destination was the Oregon Territory, where a vast timber fortune and a man she barely knew awaited her. Her life, meticulously planned by others, stretched before her like a railroad track laid across an empty map. The caravan pushed onward, a fragile line of civilization drawn through towering mountains and beside roaring rivers. It moved with a slow, grinding certainty, until the day the world came undone. The river, swollen with a week of mountain rain, was a churning brown serpent. As the lead wagon eased onto the makeshift ferry, the ropes snapped with a sound like a rifle shot. The raft buckled, and the horses screamed, their eyes wide with terror. Elara's carriage, next in line, was jolted forward. The ground beneath the wheels, already soft, gave way completely. With a sickening lurch, the carriage tipped, rolled, and plunged into the furious current. Elara was thrown against the side, a brutal impact against her head, and then the river took her. It was a maelstrom of dark water and splintered wood. The world became a deafening roar, a crushing weight that stole her breath and tore at her clothes. She fought, her arms flailing, until her fingers miraculously closed around a thick, floating log. Her heavy dress was an anchor, pulling her down. Water slammed into her face, filling her mouth and nose. She tried to scream, but only a choked gasp escaped. With the last of her strength, her fingers raw and bleeding, she clawed at the muddy bank. She crawled, dragging herself through slime and tangled roots until she was free of the river's grasp. She lay there, coughing up water, her body racked with violent shivers. She was alive. Soaked, bruised, her fine dress in tatters, and her hair plastered to her skin, but alive. Elara tried to push herself up, but a wave of dizziness sent her reeling. In the distance, through the ringing in her ears, she heard a sound. A low, guttural growl. Then another. The forest held more dangers than just the water. A pack of coyotes, drawn by the chaos, was closing in. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through her shock. She stumbled to her feet and began to run. Every step was agony, her ribs screaming in protest, but she couldn't stop. Branches whipped at her face and arms, tearing at her skin. Roots snaked across the forest floor, trying to trip her. Her breath came in ragged, desperate sobs. Just when she thought she had lost them, she heard it again. A snap of a twig behind her. The rustle of leaves that was not the wind. Elara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She scanned the dense undergrowth, her eyes wide with terror. They were there again, their pursuit relentless. And then she saw them. 3 shadowy forms, their eyes gleaming like yellow embers in the twilight. They fanned out, their movements low and confident. She took a step back, then another, until her legs gave out and she collapsed to her knees, all strength gone. But just as the lead animal gathered itself to spring, a sound like a whip crack echoed through the trees and an arrow buried itself in the earth, inches from the coyote's paws. A second whistle. A second arrow. The animals halted, sniffing the air with a new uncertainty, and then they vanished back into the shadows. Elara couldn't process what had just happened. She remained on the ground, trembling, speechless. Then a figure emerged from between the ancient firs. He didn't run or rush, he simply walked toward her, a longbow held loosely in one hand. His face was weathered, carved from the very mountains around them, his eyes dark and unreadable. He was a part of this forest, as much as the trees and the stones. Fear, primal and instinctive, seized Elara, and she scrambled backward. "Please," she whispered, the word a faint plea. "Don't hurt me." The man didn't respond immediately. He stopped a few feet away and crouched down, his movements fluid and unhurried. "You are injured," he said, his voice a low rumble, laced with an accent she couldn't place. She struggled to understand. "Who are you?" she managed to ask. "What do you want?" He offered no answer. Elara had no choice. Her legs wouldn't obey her, her fingers were numb with cold. He gently covered her with a thick, hide blanket, lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, and began to walk. He spoke no other words. The cabin was perched on a hillside, nestled so deeply among the pines that it seemed to have grown there. It was not beautiful, there were no ornaments or pleasantries, but it was dry, silent, and safe. He laid her on a bed of soft furs near a crackling fire, gave her a wooden bowl of clean water, and placed a cool, damp cloth on her forehead. Elara, drifting in and out of consciousness, whispered her name again. He heard it. He didn't reply, but sat nearby, a silent, motionless guardian. And as the fire danced, and the night erased all traces of the disaster, Elara closed her eyes, not yet knowing that this stranger was her salvation. Morning seeped through the cracks in the log walls, painting the small interior with stripes of pale, golden light. Elara's eyes fluttered open. Her body ached with a deep, throbbing pain, her throat was parched, and a dull fire in her hip was a stark reminder of the fall. But the steady beat of her own heart confirmed she was still here. She couldn't recall any dreams, only the lingering echo of fear that still clung to her chest. She took in her surroundings. The roof was made of rough-hewn timber. The floor was hard-packed earth, covered with thick animal pelts. Beside her was an empty water bowl, and across the small room, his back to her, sat the man. He was tending the fire, stirring the glowing embers with a stick. His silhouette was solid, his presence a quiet, grounding force in the small space. He was still here. Elara pushed herself up onto her elbows, a groan escaping her lips. The man, Silas, turned his head just enough to look at her. "Do not move so fast," he said, his voice low and even. "Your body is healing." He gestured toward her hip. She stared at him, still uncertain whether this quiet man was a captor or a rescuer. His grasp of her language was strange, as if each word was a carefully chosen stone he had to pull from a deep well, but she understood him. "Mostly." "Where am I?" she asked, her own voice raspy. "The mountains." "My home," he replied simply. He didn't move with the stiff, formal posture of the men from Boston. He moved like the river outside, with a grace that seemed born of the earth itself. He rose and came toward her, carrying a steaming bowl. The aroma was unfamiliar, earthy and wild. Elara took the bowl with trembling hands. It was a broth brewed from roots and herbs she couldn't possibly name. "What is this?" she asked, her voice still laced with suspicion. Silas returned to his spot by the fire. "It is not poison," he said, and the corner of his mouth twitched, a fleeting hint of a smile. The absurdity of the situation, the sheer strangeness of it all drew a small, weak laugh from her. "Thank you, I suppose." He nodded. "Today you rest. Tomorrow you will walk." Elara took a tentative sip. The warmth spread through her chest, a welcome heat against the chill that had settled deep in her bones. She watched him over the rim of the bowl. "Silas," she said, testing the name she thought she'd heard him murmur to himself. "Is that your name?" He gave a short, affirmative nod. "It is my name." She pressed on, desperate for any piece of information that might ground her in this new reality. "And you speak my language?" He inclined his head slightly. "Traders? They taught me some." Silas stood up then, his silence a clear signal that the conversation was over. He walked to a corner of the cabin where strips of dried meat hung from the rafters. Elara understood. His quietness wasn't an absence of words, it was a choice. She looked down at her hands, careful not to offend him. Not yet. The day passed in a slow, quiet rhythm. Elara tried to stand once, but Silas was there, gently but firmly stopping her. He cleaned and redressed the gash on her leg with a poultice of crushed leaves and a clean strip of cloth. He brought her more water, and later, a piece of dense, dark bread. She ate in silence, watching him. He was not young like the suitors her father had paraded before her, but he was not old either. He had broad shoulders and strong, capable hands. His face was tanned by a sun she had never known. There was something in his eyes she couldn't name. It wasn't kindness, but it wasn't cruelty. It was something more ancient, as if he carried within him the echoes of a world that had no need for clocks or contracts. In the afternoon, Silas left the cabin. Elara didn't know where he was going or for how long. Fear, a familiar companion, returned for a moment. But he hadn't bolted the door. He had simply left another blanket at the foot of her furs and given her a long, steady look before he departed. "I will not be long. Rest." He returned at dusk with an armful of firewood and two freshly caught trout. Elara watched as he expertly prepared them by the fire. A new kind of language began to form between them, one made of gestures and glances. Pointing, looking, nodding. It was clumsy, but it worked. "Do you have a family?" she asked into the dimming light, not really expecting an answer. Silas stared into the flames for a long time before he spoke. "My people are far away." Elara asked no more questions. That night he slept by the entrance, wrapped in his own blanket. He did not touch her, did not come any closer than necessary. He was just a guardian, a silent and distant protector. She fell asleep to the sound of the crackling fire, the whisper of the wind through the pines, and the steady rhythm of his breathing from across the cabin. And for the first time since the accident, fear did not haunt her dreams. In the mountains, the days had no names. There was only the shifting light and the changing sounds of the forest. Elara began to measure time by the smell of wood smoke in the morning, by the long shadows that stretched across the clearing at dusk, and by the way the air grew crisp and clear as the sun dipped behind the jagged peaks. She lost count of how many days she had been there. 3, 5, perhaps a week. For the first time in her life, it didn't seem to matter. Silas spoke little, but his silence was not hostile. It was a respectful space, a territory he did not invade, and Elara found herself growing accustomed to it, needing it in a way she never could have anticipated. Each morning he would bring her food, check her wound, and then leave to hunt or check his traps. He always returned as the sun began its descent. She, in turn, began to move about the cabin, learning the quiet boundaries of this new, temporary home. She didn't pry into his few belongings or touch the tools she didn't understand, but she washed their bowls in the nearby stream, folded the furs, and gathered dried kindling for the fire. She was learning this place, and learning him. One afternoon, as Silas was sharpening a knife with a smooth, flat stone, Elara approached him cautiously. She sat on a log opposite him, a careful distance between them, a bridge they had not yet learned how to cross. "What is this called?" she asked, pointing to a bundle of dried herbs hanging from a rafter. Silas looked up, his hands never ceasing their rhythmic work. "Yarrow." "What is it for?" "For fever. And to stop bleeding." She nodded, repeating the word softly to herself, committing it to memory. Then she pointed to another. "And that one?" "Sage," he answered. "To cleanse." A different kind of question formed on her lips. "Do you have another name besides Silas?" He hesitated, "A rare occurrence. Silas is the name the traders gave me. My own name is not for your tongue." The words were not unkind, just a statement of fact. She understood. "Why did you leave your people?" He looked at her then, his dark eyes holding a history she couldn't read. "Because sometimes the deepest wounds are not on the skin." He paused, his gaze turning inward. "When I was a boy, settlers came. They spoke of peace but brought fire. My family is gone. They said my anger was a sickness, that it would poison the rest of them." Elara didn't know what to say. There was a raw purity in his grief, so different from the veiled sorrows of her own world. She could only nod in understanding. "I have never seen a sky so full," she said, changing the subject, gesturing vaguely upwards. "There are many things to see here," he said, his eyes following her gaze. "If you know how to look." A few minutes passed in comfortable silence. Then Silas offered her a piece of dried venison. "Eat," he said. She took it without hesitation, her trust in him now a solid, tangible thing. She gave him a small, almost shy smile. "Thank you." Silas looked down, but she saw the faintest softening around his mouth. "You are welcome." That day, for the first time, Elara stepped out of the cabin alone. She walked a few yards into the clearing, leaning on a sturdy branch he had carved for her. The forest was larger, more alive than she had ever imagined. Everything had a sound, a purpose. The wind carried new scents to her damp earth, sharp pine resin, the sweet perfume of wildflowers. Here, away from the noise of her former life, she was discovering a different kind of language. When she returned, she found Silas mending a snare. He paused, watching her approach. He had a strange way of simply being in the world. He sought no attention, required no conversation. But everything he did felt deliberate, as if each small action had its own profound meaning. "How do you say thank you in your language?" she asked. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Eviha," he said, pronouncing it slowly. She repeated it, stumbling over the sounds. He shook his head slightly, a flicker of amusement in his eyes, and said it again. "Eviha." Elara tried once more. This time, he nodded. "Better." And how do you say my name? Elara, he said, the pronunciation oddly perfect. She smiled. You say it better than I do. Silas looked down, returning his focus to the snare, but a small curve had formed on his lips. It was not an open smile, but it was there. Elara saw it and she knew. They were beginning to understand each other, not because of words, but because of the space between them. They were no longer rescuer and victim, or stranger and stranger. They were just two people, unexpectedly thrown together, learning to share a world that needed no translation, only respect. The rain came without warning, a soft, persistent drizzle that wasn't violent, but soaked everything it touched. It fell all night, a quiet, steady rhythm on the roof, as if the sky were trying to wash the world clean without making a sound. Elara had been caught in it while gathering fallen branches at the edge of the clearing. She said nothing when she came back inside, shivering, and neither did Silas, but he watched her from the corner of his eye as she hung her damp cloak by the fire to dry. The next morning, she didn't get up. Silas noticed the change in the cabin's silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of someone sleeping, but a heavy, thick stillness that seemed to weigh down the air. He moved closer. Elara's eyes were closed, her face was pale, but her forehead was slick with sweat. When he placed the back of his hand against her skin, he felt the heat radiating from her. Fever, he murmured to himself. He didn't hesitate. He went out into the rain-soaked forest without a word, moving like a shadow between the wet trees. He knew what he was looking for: willow bark, the bitter roots of the feverfew plant, the leaves of wild mint. He returned with his hands full, his expression grim and focused. He brewed a dark, potent tea and gently lifted her head, helping her drink the bitter liquid. He placed cool, damp cloths on her forehead, moistened her cracked lips with water, and sat with her for hours, a silent, unwavering vigil. In her delirium, Elara spoke. Not full sentences, but fragments of her life. Her father's name, a line from a song her mother used to sing, and sometimes, just soft, incoherent sounds of distress. Silas didn't answer her, but he listened, like someone committing another person's dreams to memory. By the third day, the fever broke. She awoke with clear, though weary, eyes. She saw him sitting by the fire, grinding something in a stone ball. How long? She whispered. 3 sons, he answered without looking up. Elara tried to sit up, but he was at her side in an instant, placing a firm but gentle hand on her shoulder. Rest. You are not strong yet. She obeyed, not out of fear, but out of a nascent trust. In her world, women were not permitted to be weak. Here it was simply a state of being, to be tended to without judgment. Thank you, she said softly, for taking care of me. Silas only nodded. You spoke my name in your fever. She looked at him, surprised. I remember. And your mother's. And of your home. You cried. Elara looked away, but she felt no shame. Not in front of him. What else did I say? Nothing of shame, Silas answered, with a gentleness that caught her off guard. That afternoon, while she slept, Silas left the cabin. When he returned, he carried something wrapped in a small piece of leather. He had been carving it for weeks, long before she fell ill, but for some reason, he had felt compelled to finish it during the long nights of her fever. It was a pendant carved from dark wood into the shape of a hawk in flight. He left it beside her water ball without a word. Elara found it when she woke up. She held it in her palm, tracing the smooth, detailed lines with her fingertip. She didn't have to ask if it was for her. She simply clutched it to her chest, a silent offering of gratitude passing between them. Later, as they shared a simple meal by the fire, Elara dared to ask a question that had been on her mind for days. "Your shoulder," she said quietly. "What happened?" Silas went still. She was referring to the network of old, pale scars he usually kept hidden beneath his shirt. An ancient, jagged pattern that ran from his neck down across his chest. He had never shown it to anyone. Without a word, he unlaced the top of his leather shirt and let the fabric fall away just enough for her to see. Elara held her breath. The marks were ugly, deep, as if hot metal had been dragged across his skin, a permanent brand. "Soldiers," he said, his voice flat. "I was a prisoner for 3 months. Why? Because I was born on this land, and they were not." His words were simple, but they held an entire universe of pain and injustice. A lump formed in her throat, not of pity, but of a fierce, unfamiliar anger at a world built upon such cruelty. "You did not deserve that," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Silas finally met her gaze. "I know. That is why I did not let them kill me." A long silence settled between them. That night, after the fire had burned down to glowing coals, Elara did not return to her own sleeping first. She sat near him, her legs crossed, a blanket draped over her shoulders. They didn't speak. They just listened to the sounds of the forest, the crackle of the embers, the quiet breathing that filled the small space. And without seeking it, they shared something more than the warmth of the fire. They shared the beginning of a trust that no longer needed to be earned. The forest was quieter than usual. It was not a peaceful silence, but a tense, held breath, quiet, as if the very trees were listening for something humans could not yet hear. Silas felt it on his skin before he heard it with his ears. There was a foreign scent on the wind, a faint but undeniable trace of something that did not belong. He left that morning earlier than normal. Elara was still sleeping, curled in her furs, the small wooden hawk clutched in her hand. Silas followed a barely there trail down toward the river. He was looking for deer tracks, but he found something else instead. Smoke? He followed the scent cautiously, moving through the trees like a ghost. It was old smoke, thin and grey, the kind a campfire leaves behind when it has been abandoned. When he reached the clearing by the river, he understood everything. The splintered remains of a carriage, a wheel half sunk in the mud, trunks broken open, their contents books, fine clothes soaked and ruined. The skeletons of horses, picked clean by scavengers. It was her caravan. There were no bodies of people, but the signs of a violent, chaotic end were everywhere. Silas did not go closer than he had to. This was not his place. But he saw a small, leather-bound book of poetry caught on a thorny branch. He recognized the gold leaf initials embossed on the cover. He carefully untangled it, wrapped it in a piece of cloth, and took it with him. When he returned to the cabin, Elara was awake, sitting by the cold hearth. She looked up as he entered. He said nothing at first, just sat on the log opposite her. Then, he took out the small, ruined book and placed it on the fur between them. She recognized it instantly. "It's mine." He nodded. The carriage is south of here. There is no one. Why, she whispered, though she already knew the answer. Are they? He met her eyes. They are gone. Elara looked down at the book, her fingers tracing her own initials. She did not cry. She did not scream. A profound and chilling emptiness settled over her. Her mind pieced together what Silas had left unsaid. No one was coming for her. There was no desperate fiancé leading a search party, no armed guard riding to her rescue. She was utterly, completely alone. She slowly got to her feet and walked outside. Silas did not stop her. He remained by the fire, waiting. Elara walked to the edge of the clearing and stood there, looking out at the vast, indifferent wilderness that had swallowed her past whole. And for the first time since she had arrived, she felt not fear, but a hollow void. And into that void, a question she had never before dared to ask took root: who am I if no one is left to look for me? She didn't know how long she stood there as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. When she finally returned to the cabin, she walked past Silas and sat down beside him. "Give me a knife," she said, her voice steady. He looked at her, his expression questioning. "I want to learn." "Learn what?" "To live here," she said, meeting his gaze with a fire he had never seen before. "Not to die if I am left alone again." Silas held her gaze for a long moment. Then he stood, went to his small workbench, and returned with a smaller knife, its handle worn smooth from use. "This is not for fighting," he said, placing it in her hand. "It is for cutting, for carving, for respecting what you take." Elara closed her hand around the handle. It felt solid, real. It was a promise. And in a way, so was she. That night, they didn't sleep in their separate corners. They didn't share a bed, but they sat with their backs against the same wall, the warmth of the fire in front of them, the warmth of each other beside them. There were no soft words, no promises. Just the silent certainty that what they were building in this quiet place was beginning to feel like a home. Elara was no longer the girl from the city who wondered if the water was safe to drink. She no longer expected anyone to save her, because she understood, for the first time, that no one else was coming. And that realization, instead of breaking her, was making her strong. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. They were no longer just cohabitants, they were teacher and student. Elara woke before the sun, her determination a palpable force in the small cabin. She would follow Silas into the forest, the small knife tucked into a makeshift belt, her wooden staff in hand. At first, he said nothing, just observed her with that neutral expression he wore when he didn't want to reveal his thoughts. But he didn't stop her. He let her walk with him, and then, without any formal declaration, he began to teach her. "You do not step there," he said one morning, pointing to a small, blue-flowered plant. "It is medicine. If you crush it, the spirit leaves it." Elara nodded, her focus intense. "What is it called in your language?" Silas glanced at her. "It has no name in your tongue. We call it skytier." She repeated the word, memorizing it. The next day, when they passed the same spot, she stopped and nodded to the plant as if greeting an old friend. "Good morning, skytier," she whispered. She learned how to start a fire with flint and steel, how to tell the difference between the tracks of a deer and a coyote, how to read the clouds, how to smell the coming rain. She discovered that the trees had a language, but only if one was still enough to listen. That silence was a tool for survival. That fear was not something to be conquered by shouting, but to be carried alongside you, a quiet companion. "Do not touch that," Silas said one afternoon, stopping her with a hand on her arm. She had been about to reach for a vine with inviting-looking red berries. "What is it?" "Slow poison," he said. "It will not kill you, but your skin will burn for a week." She nodded, feeling no offense at his bluntness. She was beginning to understand that Silas didn't speak in harsh words, but in necessary ones. The forest had its own unforgiving rules, and he respected them with a reverence that was almost religious. "Did you learn all of this by yourself?" she asked one night as they shared grilled fish by the fire. Silas took a sip of water before answering. "My grandfather taught me. Before the soldiers came." "And your grandfather?" "They killed him." Elara looked down. "They had guns," Silas said with a shrug, though his eyes were dark with memory. "He had a song." He said nothing more, and she did not press him. Over time, the words between them grew easier. Elara learned to speak in his language, not just repeat words. She learned the word for earth, Ama, and the word for sky, Tota. "Tota Ama," he would say, pointing up, then down. "Sky and earth. Without both, there is nothing." She would try to repeat it, and he would correct her without mockery, a small smile playing on his lips. One evening, she pointed to his chest. "Here too," he said, understanding her unspoken question. "Without this," he touched his own heart, "you understand nothing." Elara looked at him for a long time, realizing they weren't just talking about language. They were talking about seeing, about listening, about learning without imposing. And in that new, shared language of gestures, looks, and broken sentences, something more was beginning to grow. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something that felt like it, something that needed no name because it was already putting down roots. The air began to change. The fierce summer sun gentled its assault, and the highest leaves on the aspen trees began to blush with yellow. Elara noticed it in the way the wind whispered differently at night, in the changing silence of the forest, and in herself. She no longer looked at her feet when she walked. She no longer clutched the knife for comfort as she slept. She no longer startled awake at the thought of being alone because she wasn't. Silas was still a mystery in many ways, but he was no longer a stranger. They shared fire, food, and work. They even shared the silence, and Elara was beginning to understand it better than any spoken words. One afternoon, while gathering bark for the fire, she saw him down by the stream. He had taken off his shirt to wash, and it was the first time she had seen him so exposed. His back and shoulders were a roadmap of scars, not just the brand on his chest, but a dozen others long, thin lines that spoke of a life of hardship and survival. He noticed her watching and slowly turned to face her. "Who did that to you?" she asked softly. Silas didn't answer right away. He finished wringing out his shirt, hung it on a branch, and then sat on a sun-warmed rock beside her. Elara sat too, but she didn't press him. She just waited. "The trappers," he said finally, not looking at her. "They tied me to a tree. Asked me where the best pelts were. I would not tell them." "How old were you?" 17 winters. Elara clenched her fists on her knees. There was something in the flat, unemotional way he told the story that hurt more than the story itself. I am not sorry for you, she said, her voice firm. Silas finally looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Good, he said. Sorrow is a useless burden. He picked up a stick and drew a slow spiral in the dirt. After that, I did not want to be with people. They said my spirit was broken. Is it? She asked. No, he said, meeting her gaze. But sometimes I feel it ache. Elara leaned forward and smoothed the spiral away with her hand. That does not define you. And you? He asked, turning the question back on her. What has marked you? Elara went still. The world I came from, she said. The one that told me what to be, how to speak, who to marry. The one that would have me wed a man I do not love for the sake of convenience. She looked up, her eyes clear and fierce. And now? Now I breathe for myself. That night, the space between their sleeping furs seemed to shrink. Elara had learned to bake a dense, hearty bread with crushed nuts and dried berries, and she offered him a piece. He ate it in his usual silence, but when he was finished, he wiped the last crumbs from the bowl with his finger and gave her a quick, appreciative glance. He didn't say it was good, but Elara knew. Later, as he was sharpening an arrowhead, she asked him to teach her. Perhaps, he said, and shifted over, making room for her. He handed her the tools and watched. Her fingers were still clumsy, but he was patient. He corrected her not with words, but with small, guiding gestures. Your hands are strong, he said quietly. They were not before. I am strong because I am here, she replied. And you are not weak for being here. Elara looked at him then. There was still no desire in his eyes, not the soft tenderness of poets, but there was deep respect and a new way of seeing her. He no longer saw the lost girl from the river or the frightened white woman. He saw the person she was becoming, a woman who had earned her place in this wild world, a woman who, without him even realizing it, had already claimed a place in his. The night sky was so clear it looked like an inverted prairie, 1,000 distant campfires glittering above the silent mountains. Elara had never seen a sky like this. In the city, the gaslights had hidden it. Here, the wilderness revealed everything. They had eaten their dinner in silence, as usual, but it was a charged, electric silence. Silas had returned with a small deer, and he had field-dressed it with a precise, reverent skill that was a strange combination of practicality and grace. Elara had helped him prepare the meat, her hands no longer trembling at the sight of blood. After the work was done, he led her out of the cabin, up a narrow path between the pines, to a wide, flat rock that overlooked the entire valley. Here the sky was an open, unobstructed dome. The air was cool but not harsh. The world below them was asleep. They were the only ones awake. They sat side by side, their shoulders almost touching. I have never seen so many stars, Elara whispered. They are always there, Silas replied. People forget to look up. She smiled. Then she raised a hand and pointed to a bright cluster. What is that one called? Silas followed her finger. We call it the hunter. He chases the great bear through the sky for eternity. And that one? That one has no name. It is where the spirits rest. Do you believe that? She asked. I believe there is more to the world than what we can hold in our hands. Elara gazed at the stardusted sky for a long time. My mother used to sing me a song before I slept, she said suddenly, without knowing why. And then, softly, her voice barely a thread of sound, she began to sing. It was a simple, ancient lullaby, a sad and beautiful melody. Silas said nothing. He didn't move. He just listened. When she finished, she shrugged, a little embarrassed. I have not sung that in a long time. He was quiet for another moment. Your voice, he said, sounds like still water. Elara laughed, a sound of pure surprise. Is that a compliment? He nodded. My people sing from the chest. You sing from the soul. She looked at him. He wasn't trying to charm her. He wasn't playing a game. He was speaking with a clean, almost clumsy honesty that moved her more than any eloquent flattery ever could. How do you say soul in your language? She asked. Nita, he said. She repeated it, mispronouncing it. He corrected her with a gentle smile. She said it again, and he nodded. They spent the next hour like that, trading words, sharing the names for the sky, the moon, the fire. Silas taught her how to say I and you, how to form the simple sentence, you are here. Elara repeated it. You are here. They looked at each other, and in that moment, for the very first time, nothing needed to be explained. Their eyes said more than their mouths ever could. Their hearts beat a rhythm their hands had not yet learned. And though they had not touched, the distance between them had become sacred. As they walked back to the cabin, they moved closer together. When they reached the door, Elara entered first, but as she passed him, her hand brushed against his. It was a fleeting, accidental touch. But this time, neither of them pulled away. He closed his fingers gently around hers, holding them for just a second, as if protecting something he didn't want to let go of. That night, while she slept, he stayed awake, watching the fire die down to embers, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing. And for the first time since he was a boy, he did not feel alone. The summer wind had begun its retreat. The scent of the earth grew richer, damper. Elara no longer thought in terms of days or weeks. She measured time in the way Silas watched the horizon, in the ripening of the wild berries, in the gathering of birds in the high branches. There were nights they didn't speak a word, but fell asleep near each other. Others, they shared simple words until sleep claimed them. The language between them was no longer a bridge, it was a shelter. Until one morning, Silas stopped mid-stride by the stream. His steps, usually so sure and light, had become slow, heavy. Elara noticed immediately. What is it? He didn't answer. He crouched down, touched the damp earth, tasted the air. Then he stood, his face a grim mask. We are not alone. Elara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Who? He didn't reply at once. He walked in a slow circle, examining the ground. Then he looked up at the trees. They passed here. A day ago. Maybe two. His voice was low, tense. Trappers. They smell of metal and whiskey. Elara swallowed hard. What are they looking for? Furs? Trouble? Anything they can take. And if they find us? Silas met her eyes, and his gaze was like flint. They will not find me. And they will not find you, if you do as I say. That afternoon, the cabin grew quieter than ever. Silas hid their few valuables, covered the entrance with branches, and extinguished the fire long before nightfall. He prepared a small pack with dried meat, a water skin, and a blanket. If something happens, he told her, his voice low and urgent, you run to the river. You follow it downstream. You do not look back. Don't say that. I say it because it may happen. She shook her head, a surge of anger rising in her. I will not leave you. You will if the time comes. He was right, and she hated him for it. They didn't have to wait long. There were 3 of them, armed with long rifles, their clothes stained with grime. They weren't soldiers, they were predators, their greed a visible aura around them. Silas saw them long before they reached the clearing. He motioned for Elara to hide behind a low ridge of rock and earth, a place where she could see without being seen. The men approached with loud, clumsy steps. The one who seemed to be the leader shouted into the clearing, his voice a gravelly rasp. Hello the camp. We saw your smoke. We are friendly folk just looking to trade. Silas did not move from the shadows of the cabin. We mean no harm. Just want a place to rest our heads, maybe some hot food. Hey! You in there. Are you an Injun? The last word was spat with contempt. Silas stepped out then, silent and imposing, his longbow in his hand. One of the men laughed. Well, look at that. The savage speaks after all. Another one took a step forward. There's nothing for you here, Silas said, his voice dangerously calm. We'll be the judge of that, the man sneered, and took another step. The twang of the bowstring was a sharp, sudden sound. The impact was a dry thud. An arrow quivered in the dirt, not a foot from the man's boot. The message was unmistakable. The men froze. They looked at Silas, at the arrow, at the deep, silent woods around them. They were weighing their odds, and they decided they didn't like them. Not because they understood respect, but because they still possessed a sliver of fear. They backed away slowly, then turned and disappeared into the trees. Elara emerged from her hiding place as soon as they were gone, her heart still pounding. She ran to him. Are you all right? Silas nodded, his breathing deep and even. They will be back. How do you know? Because men like that do not like to be told no. Elara was trembling, not with fear, but with a complex mix of rage and relief. I thought you were going to kill them. No, he said, looking out at the forest where they had vanished. Only remind them. Remind them that not everything in this world belongs to them. That night, when they settled down to sleep, Elara didn't go to her own furs. She moved beside him, laying a hand on his chest and resting her head on his shoulder. Silas said nothing, but he wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. It was a gesture of pure, protective comfort, as if for the first time, he was defending not just himself, but her. The threat was gone for now, but its shadow lingered. It was in the air, an invisible dust that settled on everything. Elara felt it in the way Silas now walked with a new tension, in the way he slept less and sharpened his arrows with a grim focus. He was no longer just the guardian of the mountain, he was her guardian, and that, she realized with a pang, made him vulnerable. Elara didn't know what to do with that thought. She carried it inside her like a hot coal, afraid to drop it, but afraid to hold on too tight. In the days that followed, they worked closer than ever, shoring up the cabin walls, gathering extra firewood, patching the roof against the coming autumn rains. He taught her how to throw a stone with enough accuracy to stun a small bird, how to use her knife with more precision. She learned quickly, but there was something else in her eyes now. A searching look. One afternoon, while she was mending a tear in a blanket, the words came out before she could stop them. Have you ever been in love? Silas looked up from his work, his hands still. Why do you ask this? Because I am not sure if I have, she said honestly, and I wish to know how it feels. He took a long time to answer. He finished tying a knot, then said, when you are, your chest hurts. But it is not because something is missing. It is because you are no longer the only one in there. Elara nodded slowly, absorbing his words. Then I think I am. Silas went completely still. He looked at her, his face serious, as if her words were hanging in the air between them, fragile and powerful. I am too, he said at last, his voice barely a whisper. That night, the fire burned low, casting a warm, red glow on their faces. Elara sat beside him, her feet bare, wrapped in a blanket. What does it mean to you? She asked quietly. To be in love. Silas watched the flames. It means I do not run when I am scared. It means I stay, even when it hurts. She moved closer, sitting directly in front of him. And she said, her voice trembling slightly, am I what makes you scared? He met her gaze. The silence between them was so intense it was almost painful. Yes, he whispered. I don't know how to do this, she confessed. Neither do I, he replied. They remained like that, not moving forward, not yet touching, but in their eyes, there was no more distance. Only fire. Later, as they prepared their sleeping furs, their hands brushed. It was an insignificant gesture that had happened a dozen times before. But this time, Elara didn't pull away. And neither did he. She took his hand in hers. His was large and calloused, marked by years of a life lived outdoors. Hers was smaller but firm. He threaded his fingers through hers, and just held them. There was no kiss, no further caress, but Elara felt it in her chest, in her throat, in the pit of her stomach, a tremor that needed no name. Tell me something, he said. What? Something you are afraid to say. His lips moved, not with difficulty, but with a reverence for the words he was about to speak. You have changed me. She didn't answer. She just looked at him for a long, deep moment, and then she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his, closing her eyes. The world stopped in that instant, not by magic, but because everything that mattered had finally been said, and nothing more was needed. The autumn wind carried a different scent, no of a distant wood smoke, of newly cured hides of horses. Elara noticed it first, waking one morning with the feeling that something had shifted in the world beyond the trees. The forest didn't sound the same. The birds were quieter. Someone is close, she said, as she braided her hair. Yes, Silas replied, his face grim. I know. It wasn't fear in his expression, but a kind of weary resignation. The mountains could protect them from many things, but not from the echoes of the world Elara had once belonged to. In the middle of the afternoon, they saw him, a single rider, framed between the tall pines. He carried no weapon in his hand, only a crudely made white flag tied to a stick. Silas told Elara to hide, but she refused. If it is someone who knows me, I must look them in the eye. Silas didn't argue, but he stood firm at her side. The rider dismounted. He was an older man, with a graying beard and dusty boots, his face etched with exhaustion and disbelief when he saw her. "Miss Elara? My God, it is you." A chill went through Elara. "Who are you?" "It's Davies, miss. I was the guide for the caravan. I survived the flood. We thought you were dead." His eyes flickered to Silas, a mixture of fear and suspicion. "Your fiancé, Mr. Sterling, he never gave up hope." "He is alive?" "Yes, miss. He's at Fort Endeavour, not 2 days' ride from here. He sent us out to search for any sign." Davies's gaze fell on Silas again. "We didn't expect to find you with him." Elara stepped forward. "His name is Silas. He saved my life." Davies looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "You must come with me, miss. Mr. Sterling is a powerful man. He's been telling everyone you were taken by a savage." The ugly word hung in the air. "If you don't come back, he'll have the whole army out here looking for you. And for him." The threat was clear. Charlotte felt her world tilt. "I cannot just decide that now." Davies looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Miss, he's an Indian. He can offer you nothing. You are a lady." "I am a woman," she whispered, mostly to herself. And she knew then that the title of lady no longer belonged to her, and she did not want it. "May I speak with him alone?" she asked Silas. He nodded, his face a stone mask. When they were out of earshot, Davies's voice dropped. "Listen to me, miss. I don't know what you've been through out here, but this wilderness, it changes people. If you don't say this man took you by force, they will hang him. There's no trial for an Indian who takes a white woman." The silence was thicker than fog. Elara felt her heart pound in her temples. She looked back at Silas, who was watching them from a distance, his posture rigid. "I will go with you," she said to Davies, her voice cold as ice. "But if a single hair on that man's head is harmed, I swear to you, I will not be silent." Davies just nodded, looking deeply uncomfortable. And so, without another word, Elara walked back to Silas. She stopped in front of him, at a loss for what to say. She looked into his eyes, hoping he would understand what she couldn't articulate. "I have to go," she murmured. "Just for a while. My fiancé. He is making trouble." Silas did not try to stop her. "Will you come back?" he asked, his voice low. She couldn't make a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "I don't know." He didn't promise to wait. She didn't ask him to. They just looked at each other. And in that look, they left everything they could not say. Elara mounted the horse Davies had brought. As they rode away and the forest closed in behind her, Silas was left alone once more. But something in the way he stood there suggested he wasn't waiting for an ending but for a return. Fort Endeavour rose from the dusty plains like a decaying promise. It was a square of rough timber and smoke, filled with uniformed soldiers marching in circles and women in stiff dresses who spoke in low voices but judged with loud eyes. Elara hadn't seen anything like it since she'd last wore a corset. The air here had a different weight, heavy with scrutiny. She was greeted with a mixture of relief and scandal. A young, white woman, alive after being left for dead with a native man. That last part wasn't spoken aloud, but it was in everyone's eyes. Her fiancé, Mr. Sterling, was a man whose ambition was as sharp and cold as a winter morning. When he saw her, his face was a mask of possessive relief. Elara. By God, I knew you were alive. He rushed to her, but his embrace felt more like an act of ownership than affection. That savage, what did he do to you? The question was like a slap. He saved me, Elara said, her voice flat. He protected me. He taught me. Sterling's face tightened, but he said nothing more. That same night, the story began to twist and spread through the fort like wildfire that Elara had been a captive, that the Indian had held her against her will, that she was confused and traumatized. She heard the whispers from her room, where she had been installed like a fragile doll. She was not to be left alone. Her voice, once again, was not her own. On the second day, they brought Silas in. He had approached the fort, seeking her out as he had said he would. They captured him without a fight, but with a casual brutality that made Elara's stomach churn. They bound his hands, shoved him, and locked him in a small, dark cell without asking a single question, judging him solely for the color of his skin and his proximity to her. A maid, whispering the news as she left Elara's meal, told her of his capture. "Where is he?" Elara demanded. "In the east cell, miss. But you can't see him. The colonel says he's to be tried." "For what?" "For kidnapping. For assault. For being what he is." A roar ignited in Elara's chest. It was not fear. It was rage. The trial was the next day. An impromptu, hurried affair, a circus in uniform. She appeared without being summoned. She walked into the room, her head held high, her hair pulled back severely, and her voice cut through the murmuring. "I wish to speak." The colonel, a man with tired eyes and a thick moustache, tried to silence her. "Miss Elara, this is not your place, you are judging him because of me. That makes it my place." All eyes turned to her. "That man," Elara said, pointing to Silas, who stood in chains in the corner, "did not kidnap me. He found me, injured and abandoned by the very caravan that you praise for its bravery. He healed me. He fed me. He taught me how to survive." "Miss Alcott," the colonel began, "you are overwrought. I am clearer than I have ever been in my life," she cried, her voice ringing with conviction. A shocked silence fell over the room. Elara walked to the center of the hall. "He treated me with more humanity than any of you have. He never laid a hand on me without permission. He never raised his voice. He never told me what I should be. He looked at me as an equal." "The man is an Indian," one of the officers snarled. "Yes." Elara shot back. "And he is more of a man than many I see in this room." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The colonel tried to restore order, but it was too late. Elara's words had landed like a stone in a still pond. They could not be taken back. They could not be ignored. Hours later, Silas was released. Not because they believed in his innocence, but because they didn't know how to contend with a white woman of her standing speaking for him. It was easier to let him go than to confront the truth her testimony revealed. Elara was waiting for him outside the fort walls. He walked out, his head held high, looking neither left nor right. When he saw her, he stopped. He said nothing. She did. You still want me to run downstream if things go wrong? Silas took a moment to reply. Then a slow smile touched his lips. No. Now I want you to run with me. Elara closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him. And there, in the middle of the dust, and the judgment, and a world that did not understand them, they chose each other. Again, in the days that followed, Elara and Silas kept to the edge of the mountains, a silent, watchful pair. They knew they had bought time, not freedom, that the forgiveness of the white world was conditional. Elara's fiancé, Mr. Sterling, left the fort in a fury, his pride deeply wounded. He did not say goodbye. The women of the fort avoided her, their whispers following her like shadows. Poor creature! What did that savage do to her to make her so confused? They said she didn't want to go back. And that was the truth. At dawn on the third day, Elara, dressed in simple, practical clothes, gathered her few belongings and left the fort without a word of farewell. Silas was waiting for her where the forest began, just as he'd promised. They didn't speak as they met, they just started walking. But as they crossed the invisible line between the tamed land and the wild, a patrol of soldiers stopped them. "You are going with him?" a young lieutenant asked, his face a mixture of pity and disapproval. "I am," Elara answered, her voice firm. "I would advise against it, miss. Life out there is hard. And there is no coming back for those who cross that line." Elara lifted her chin. "There was never anything back there for me." They walked for hours, crossing rivers and valleys that only Silas knew. Every step was a farewell to the world that no longer claimed them, but it was also a baptism. In the late afternoon, they stopped on the crest of a hill, the same hill where they had first looked out over the valley. From there, you could see the forest stretching out like a green promise, and on the other side, the distant smoke of the fort, growing fainter. "Are you ready?" he asked her. "I have been ready since I opened my eyes by the river." Silas looked at her, and for the first time in a week, his eyes were calm. But then, a different kind of smoke appeared on the horizon. Thick, black, and angry. From the north, a pillar of fire rose into the sky. A band of men, likely sent by Sterling, had set fire to the lower part of the valley. It was a message. A punishment. A warning. "They have burned the cabin," Silas said, his voice tight. "Why?" "Because they cannot accept that a woman like you would choose a man like me." Elara gritted her teeth. She felt anger and pain, but no fear. "Then we will build a home where they cannot reach." He looked at her as if he couldn't believe her words. "Do you know what you are saying?" "I do," she said. "And for the first time in my life, I do not think I will regret it." That night they camped on a high, flat rock, surrounded by ancient trees. There was no cabin, no walls. Only the sky, the wind, and the warmth of each other. Elara laid her blanket next to his and looked at him. "We begin here." He nodded. "Here, or anywhere the world will leave us be." She moved closer and kissed him slowly, without fear or haste. And in that first kiss, there was no urgency, only acceptance. His, for the woman who had left her name and her blood behind. Hers, for the man who was always an outsider, always alone. And together, between the fires men had lit in the distance, and the one they were lighting in their own skin, they decided they didn't need permission. They only needed each other. The months passed like water in the river, steady and without hurry. Their new cabin became a home, the clearing a village, the forest their entire world. Elara no longer knew the day of the week. She measured time by the steady growth of her belly and the new strength in her chest. A quiet, deep power. Silas carved wood every afternoon. His strong hands created objects with soul, spoons, bowls, small animal figures, toys that did not yet have an owner. When Elara asked him why he made so many, he would reply, "One day, our children will come. And they will want your stories and mine." She would smile, and then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she would teach him written words, scratching simple letters into a piece of soft bark. He copied them with a patient, reverent focus. "River," he would say, his voice sounding like the water itself. Their son was born on a misty morning, without screams or doctors, only their shared breath and the ancient instinct of their bodies. Elara brought him into the world on a bed of furs, her forehead pressed to the cool earth. Silas received him, cleaned him, and held him with wet eyes and a voice thick with emotion. "He is strong," he whispered. "He is beautiful," she replied. They named him Kai, which meant willow in Silas' language, because he was born beneath the sheltering branches of the great willows that lined their part of the river, the same place where Elara had first felt him move. The years flowed by. Kai grew up between animals and songs, in a language that was a mix of both of their own. He knew how to say mother in English and father in Silas' tongue. Elara read to him from her one remaining book every night, and Silas told him the old legends under the stars. "Where do we live?" Kai asked one night. "Here," Elara answered. "What is this place called?" He looked at Silas, who looked up at the sky. "It has no name," he said. "Because what is only ours does not need one." Sometimes lost travelers would stumble upon their clearing. They would ask for water, for directions. They always left with more than they asked for. And they would speak later of the white woman with the steady voice and the quiet Indian man with the gentle eyes, and they'd say that deep in the forest, where the paths disappear, there is a cabin where love lives. One afternoon, while Kai napped, Elara sat beside Silas under their favorite willow. The sun filtered through the branches like liquid gold. "Are you happy?" she asked him. He took her hand. "I have no other life to compare it to." "I do," whispered Elara. "And I have never felt such peace." He nodded, saying nothing more. And in that silence, in that land with no name, beneath the tree where their new life began, Elara knew she had finally arrived. Not at a place, but in herself. They say that at the far end of the valley, beyond where the willows grow and the paths die, there is a quiet hill where the bison no longer run. There, under a solitary oak, is a simple stone with no name, surrounded by wild flowers that no one planted. The old ones say this stone holds the story of a white woman who got lost in the woods and found she no longer wanted to be found. Others say it was an Indian who saved her, that they lived and loved in secret, far from laws and judgment. What they built was not just a home, but a legacy of quiet defiance. The story of Elara and Silas became a whisper on the wind, a legend told around campfires. A testament to the idea that true freedom isn't about the land you own but the choices you make. That home is not a place you find on a map, but a sanctuary you build with your own hands in the heart of someone who sees you for who you truly are. Their love story wasn't written in books or declared in churches. It was carved into the heart of the wilderness itself, a silent, powerful testament to a love that was brave enough to choose its own path. What one word would you use to describe the love that Elara and Silas built together? Share it with us in the comments below. Their story is a reminder that the most powerful connections are often the ones that grow in silence, away from the noise of the world. If their journey moved you, please give this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the heart. Thank you for walking this path with us.